Jessica! Oh my god! Oh my god! Jess! Jess!
Hi, my name is Robert Denner, and this is the Technology Game Space Game Club podcast of Until Dawn.
Yeah.
We will be discussing the game for PlayStation 4. We played it, actually, a lot of us have played it as a group a couple weeks back, each playing a different character. So what I think we should do to start is, go around the table, give our names, and maybe the characters that we played if we joined in the group. And if you played it by yourself, you want to say that. For me, I played Jessica and Josh.
All right. I'll go. Hi, my name is Taro Mia. I was part of the group that played a couple of weeks ago together, and I played as Chris. And I think at the time I had some fun with the game, but I'm trying to recall it now, and I kind of realized that the game is a bit forgettable. So that's my first impression with the game, and I'll probably go into more detail about that.
Alright, my name is John. I played the game solo. My initial impressions of the game were that I could have probably gotten the same entertainment value from like a bargain bin game at Walmart. Or movie, or, whatever, what have you. I'll definitely go deeper into that, but, there's ups and downs, but yeah, mostly forgettable.
I'm Jamie. I played it as part of the group of us that all played together here at Tech Valley Game Space, and I played as Mike, and I was filled with self-loathing the entire time. I really did not like Mike as a character, and did as much as I could to undermine Mike's chances of survival, because I desperately wanted him to die off. I had pretty negative impressions of the game initially. I'm not a big fan of slasher movies, so playing a game that felt like it was kind of imitating that genre didn't really appeal to me that much. But it kind of grew on me over time, especially the experience of playing it as a group, which was fun, where we could at least make fun of, the goofier elements together, of which there were many. Yeah, so overall, I ended up enjoying it more as the game went on.
I'm Anthony, and I played Pan. Was it? Sam. I liked the game. Jamie's play style was really bringing me down.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. I didn't find the game forgettable. I found myself thinking about it for a few days after playing it. I had a good time playing it with everyone in the same room. I don't normally play horror games or watch horror movies because they make me anxious. But I have played games like Resident Evil and Eternal Darkness, and I did appreciate those games. And I like this game too.
My name's Dylan. I played with the club as well. I think I played Matt, the football player, nice guy.
The token minority character.
I enjoyed the game, especially in the group setting, because everyone can make jokes about it while it's going. So, beyond that, these days I try to equate games to how much would I have paid for a movie if I had to play a game. So I figure with the group, everyone playing the game at the same time, it was worth its money, so I'd go back and play it again just to get the rest of the endings, but I'm not going to go out and buy a PS4 for it, so.
Right, so what was touched upon a little bit during the introductions, what were your initial thoughts going into the game, and did they change as you played through the game? Were they better or worse? For me, I wasn't sure what to expect. I've been following the game since it was announced many years ago for the PlayStation 3. I thought for a while that it turned into vaporware because it just suddenly dropped out of everybody's consciousness, and then suddenly it shows up as PlayStation 4 exclusive, and I had very high hopes for it. So going into the game, I was really stoked for it, and as I played more and more, I found myself really wanting to see all the other different paths to take throughout the game. I think I ended up playing it 4 times within that first week of playing it because it just really grew on me.
Like I said, like horror games aren't really my thing, so I was kind of wary about it. And Jamie, the way he was playing was really bringing me down.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. And
People died because of you.
as the game went along, I noticed that he was getting into it more, and that helps. That made me feel better too, and I started enjoying the game more as well.
So basically, I have no opinions about the game, lots of opinions about me. Okay, that's useful. The way that I was playing was really bringing me up. It's not what really matters. So yeah, as I mentioned, like I went in with kind of probably a fairly bad attitude, which was reflected in my play style. Apologies for anybody that I was taking out of the experience. I was mostly I felt like I was playing it in a way similar to Taro, the way that you on past discussions have described your play style, where I actually did want to test the limits of the game, and specifically, like, whenever I'm playing a branching narrative, especially a branching narrative that seems like a really big budget game, where every story element they put in clearly had a lot of money associated with it. Like, the graphics in this game are gorgeous. There's some fairly decent voice acting for, the type of game that it is. So that to me usually indicates that, like, the cost of every story branch is rising at that point. So I expect less story branches at that point. And so for me, it was just like a fun experiment. It was my intention to ruin it for anybody, but I did want to see, like, if I really just mess things up as badly as I can, like, is that actually going to have an impact on anything, or is the story just going to proceed as normal? And so, there were a few particular points where that created some really wacky kind of slapstick scenes. I'm generally not a fan of quick time events.
Yes.
Not a fan of quick time events, so, with wanting Mike to die, I was kind of intentionally not doing the quick time events. That was my form of protest and stuff. But the main thing that I did get into it more as I went along, so you were right. You had a good read on the ant, as usual.
Everyone did, really.
Yeah, okay, great. So,
I don't care about it.
No, I don't mean everyone had a good read on it. I mean everyone got more into it.
Yeah. Gotcha. But, most of the reason why was that the parts of the story that I didn't like and the things about the characters that I didn't like were mostly, I guess, a lot of the kind of campy, traditional, what's passes for, like, authentic teen dialogue, I felt was really bad. Like, the writers just didn't have a handle on writing, like, authentic dialogue that I believe for these characters, and they were throwing in, just lots of incredibly cheesy stuff. And, in a way that kind of fits, I guess, with the tone of this type of horror movie, but, as the game progressed, I found that kind of fell away a little bit more for whatever reason in the writing. And yeah, the writing just kind of shifted a little bit away from, the characters were in a more dire situation, so they weren't cracking as many, like, whatever sex jokes or whatever stupid stuff they were doing. They weren't just fighting over, like, petty stuff as much, which I felt made a lot of them really unlikable at the beginning. And so, yeah, I started to get into a few of the characters more. Never really came around on Mike when I was playing. But,
Anthony killed him, so at least, he did you a favor. So, to start off with, my initial impression was, it was Robert who introduced the game to me a while ago, and what I got from that was there was an E3 playable demo that I was watching. And that's a segment that you guys already saw where it starts off with Chris and Amanda, I think was her name, where Ashley, correct. Chris and Ashley, where they're just trying to they're going through this really creepy segment with a bunch of ghosts coming out. And it ends with the saw blades falling down on them as they have to make a hard choice of shooting either Ashley or Chris kind of moment. So, watching that, I thought that the game was like this B horror, stupid, hilarious, campy thing. And as you guys know, that's pretty much how I played at the very beginning, where I was cracking a joke at how awful the situation, or how awful the characters were, and like how stupid the whole thing was rolling out as we went further into the game. I think it was the monster at the end. Wendigo, yes. I think the moment they introduced the Wendigo was when the magic of the game was suddenly lost on me. The moment the Wendigo came in, like, the game stopped being scary from that point, which, to be fair, at the beginning it wasn't so scary either, but at least there was a lot of what I saw was humor behind the story, enough that when there were some sort of horror elements to it, it caught me by surprise. The moment Wendigo kind of entered in, the game to me lost all of its magic, and I was actually a lot less into the game towards the end because of their introduction. And at least to me, like, when a monster is introduced in such a way that it's like this own entity, kind of like a Dracula or zombies that clearly doesn't exist in real life, and there's no chance of them ever existing in real life. Like, to me, that kind of loses the horror magic, where horror to me is more about having the fear of possibility that it could affect you just as much as in real life, just as much as it's affecting everyone in the game. But I didn't get that sense towards the end, and just felt like it wasn't scary anymore. And consequently, the game was a lot less interesting.
I didn't kill Mike intentionally.
No, he didn't.
Also, I thought the Wendigo parts where you had to keep the controllers still were probably the best thing, and like a new thing to introduce to a horror thing.
Yeah,
I thought that was great. I thought that caused a lot of tension, and I was actually struggling to stay still, and I was shaking.
To be fair, my parts when the Wendigo were introduced, Chris's parts basically, involved just shooting a bunch of Wendigos a lot. And there was one part where I failed on, stand still carefully kind of thing. So that may be that may have actually colored my experience. I didn't have any sort of like stand still moment, and then I let him die by trying to shoot a barrel and not shooting it fast enough.
I think that those parts cause tension too, because it's a quick time event. If you miss, I don't know what's going to happen. So,
but to me, that's not
trading completely on hitting that quick time event, and I was afraid of the Wendigo getting me. So then it was really satisfying when I hit it in the face with a pipe, whatever.
To me, that's not scary. That's an action sequence.
Okay.
I did feel like, and this is coming from playing like a whole month of Metal Gear Solid 5, I really felt that, like, the parts where you had to shoot the Wendigo was like a video game moment where it's like, reflex mode where everything slows down. It's like, that kind of felt a little gamey to me. Like, I understand why they did it, because, it would be BS if it just like, came at you. You had like 2 or 3 seconds. Yeah, like I agree with that. That turned into too much of a game, I think. I really like the don't move sections. I'm kind of surprised it didn't like go really, like trolly with it, because like I thought they would, try to vibrate the controller. There are a couple parts where like if I could see it coming up, I would just put it on the desk because like I didn't want to deal with it. So there's ways you could get around it, and like the only time I failed it was at the end, when I was trying to like replay it. Like I beat the ending, and you're able to go back. So like at the end, it's like, okay, so I'll just do this, and I failed on like one end. It's like I don't want to play through the game again, to get the next ending.
What was interesting for me with those sections where you had to hold still were, at least in our playthrough, there weren't a lot of jump scares during those moments. Like, it was just like a held moment of tension, usually. And I was expecting more jump scares to try to get like a quick kind of reflex reaction to get you to move your hands, particularly because the game has so many forced jump scares, especially in the early, the first half, which I absolutely hated. Like, if we're talking about parts that felt like game-like in a way that was forced and took us out of the experience, there was a lot more of that stuff front-loaded into the first half of the game as well for me, and that was a huge example. I think I have, I'm a bit, cranky in general about that YouTube as a phenomenon is having on games, particularly when game designers kind of try to pander to YouTubers and try to put things in their games that will allow the game to spread more, via YouTube. And, obviously there's a huge trend of jump scare horror games. That is a thing that, a YouTuber can, overreact to in a very fake, acting way, and they'll get hits. The game will get more exposure. So it's kind of this mutually beneficial thing that encourages a lot more jump scare style moments in games. But I really hate that in general. And so I was very annoyed with all the jump scares. And the feature of taking our, picture using the camera at each of the jump scares so that we could then upload it online, presumably. It was funny, we looked through the pictures that were taken, and it's mostly us just looking stone-faced, just completely not reacting to the jump scares, because they weren't, clearly they put that feature in, and they wanted to make use of it. So you just knew there was a jump scare coming at, a regular interval. So anytime it seemed like, you're in a situation where there might be a jump scare, there was going to be one. So there was no tension at all there for me. But I think also for me, if you look at all my pictures of me stone-faced in those moments, I was also I had some contrarian, feelings in me of I'm not gonna react to this because I basically hate this feature and everything.
Was that a feature because you had a camera plugged in? Because I never saw anything like that.
Presumably it only happens when you have a camera.
Yeah, you have the camera set up on the screen, and then you turn it in the options screen. When a jump scare is about to happen, it will start recording video of you from of the game playing, and then the moment the jump scare happens, you're supposed to jump, and then records that, and then it cuts off the recording, and you can see it.
Yeah, and it's it is very gimmicky, and also the funny thing was
somebody found that the LED went on.
Right, you can see the LED go on because it starts recording before the jump scare, so it. Even if you weren't already, it wasn't completely obvious there's a jump scare coming, now you know. Just see the light turn on.
I think it would have worked better if it recorded you for, longer and during a really tough decision. Because we would be really nervous about making those decisions, and we would talk about it, and people would kind of freak out.
You also pause it though, so who knows? You keep recording through the whole pause session while people are discussing, or
no, you pause it.
I like that they put one of the pause buttons on one of the triggers. So at any moment, something pops up, or there's weird, those decisions, who lives, who dies, you can just pause it and collective pause or something.
I didn't know that.
It's R1 or something.
Yeah, R1 will open up the basically your item screen, so you can put your things that you collected.
One thing I actually didn't like about this was the items screen. They show you all the collectibles and stuff, and most of them are blank, and the same with the totem. So if the butterfly effect stuff, they name everything out there. So you can see what every decision you make. There's some that get sorted into there, and you can see each single one in the story with its label. And I didn't like that. It's so someone's going to get a gun. You have to decide who. It's kind of laying out what could happen. I wasn't a fan of that. You probably could have just had shown how many there were without labeling them.
I had a feeling when I was playing through it that it might spoil the game for me if I looked into those, so I essentially waited until the game was completely over before even going into any of the items on my butterfly effect screen.
I mean, for me, and this is another like muscle memory thing from playing Metal Gear, but like every single time there's like a thing that pops up, like status effect update, like switch to, it's like, oh, what just changed right now? Because like, I mean, Metal Gear is like, things pop up at you all the time. You have to like go into your menu and like, deal with like whatever situation. So it's like, that was like kind of for me, it's like, oh, so what's going to happen like right now? And it's kind of weird because there's some parts where it tells you the effect, and then like it tells you, there's like something where maybe it was like when Chris was running from the Wendigo like the first time, and Ashley lets him in, like in my game anyway, and it tells, like, it pops up as soon as like the gameplay's over, before he like, Ashley lets him in. It says Ashley let him in. I'm like, oh, why? Like, I didn't even see she was there. Like, I felt that was kind of weird. Like, definitely could have like waited on that, when you're telling when the status pops up.
Can we talk about the butterfly effect? Because whenever those particle effects came in, it pissed me off.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I hate it too. You want to go first?
Yeah, sure, why not? It's incredibly distracting. It's like, oh, let's make a decision here. And like, so most of the game has been about making, binary decisions, which is not great per se, but there's enough that should they not put in the whole butterfly particle effect, you wouldn't have been able to guess which one affected what kind of decision, whether it was a status effect update, whether it was just a relationship update, or whether it was a vital decision that would affect you towards the end. But whenever that came up, we're like, oh god, why? So in other words, the decision we just made there is somehow relevant towards the future. And like, that kind of ruined a lot of magic for me. Anthony likes to egg on me on my opinions about Chrono Trigger. But one thing I genuinely did like about that game is not only were the decisions not exactly binary in the sense that they did a good job hiding it, right? It was a question of whether you talked to a character or whether you went up the stairs instead. And you won't have known it until you went to GameFAQs or something like that. So that was one thing that it did well.
How is that better, though? Why is that better? To have to go to GameFAQs to find that?
Because it hides critical decisions. It makes a more natural gameplay, and you wouldn't know until your second playthrough, and especially if you're talking between friends, when they'll be like, yeah, this happened when I talked to a character, and you're like, what? It did? So it was kind of, you have those social interactions that will cause you to play the game again.
You can go to GameFAQs when you want to go to GameFAQs, like at your own pace. If I care now to find out like the whole machinery underneath the story of like where all the branches are, like I can go find that out on my own time. But for the game to pop up a big UI effect every time something significant happens, like in my face, is that you don't have any choice anymore. So
the game, I don't know, I think the game was pretty aware of itself and talked about the butterfly effect in the game.
Yes, ad nauseum.
So it didn't bother me.
That was terrible too, though. The labored explanation of the butterfly effect.
I wasn't a fan of that cinematic.
Likes that.
So
why is it so bad?
What did you like about it? Let's flip it on you.
It added comic relief.
It did that.
See, everyone loves it.
It did create our favorite running joke. Boom, butterfly.
It's just aware of itself.
I did like the awareness of it, and to clarify, the actual point that I wanted to make with Chrono Trigger was that it did a much better job of hiding the consequences of your decisions. So even if they were to pull up, binary decisions such as this or that, they will never, especially since I think back in the day the technology wasn't there, they would have never told you that decision would have led to this sort of event happening versus not. So that was like entirely up, not only was that entirely up to you, but it was very opaque in letting you know what your consequences were. And I actually liked that part of that game. It led to a more natural gameplay, and especially if it wasn't such an old game, and I had friends that was still playing retro games, and I could talk about what my story and playthrough was like, I would have appreciated that, those decisions that I wouldn't have known were decisions to suddenly change the way I play the game. That would have been like a really serious conversation point, because at that point our question would now be, wait, why did that happen? And what was the original decision point that caused that to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so there's a style of adventure games like the Walking Dead, for example, where the designers have specifically mentioned, like, although it has branching elements to it, they designed it with the intention that people would play through it once, basically. So they would only get, their one particular path through the branches. And I think for me, like, just as a player, I would have preferred, if that information was going to be exposed to me of where the branch points were and what the significant decisions were, that I had the option to find out about them or not. So maybe there was, like, maybe you can turn off that UI effect in the options and we just didn't know that or whatever, for all I know. But by default, it's on.
Yeah.
And I would personally, like, I prefer to find out that information when I've gone through a single playthrough, if at all. And to me, like, having it always pop up in the middle of my first playthrough, the only thing that's encouraging me to do is, like, do kind of quick reloads and go back to a decision point if I feel like, oh, I messed up that decision, then I'll, like, do something different. So it only, like, deflates the
Can't
tension.
you play this game backwards, basically? Can you say that?
Once you completed the game the first time around, it opens up a chapters menu where you can jump to the start of any of the 10 or 11 chapters that are actually in the game.
Yeah, that's not incompatible, what I was just saying. Like, all that stuff comes up after your first playthrough.
Yeah.
I will say that, like, having more, like, quick saving or more options, like, I would have liked it if when there's, like, a butterfly effect update, like, you could jump back to that maybe, or, like, right before that, because at the end of the game, when everyone's in the house, and, like, and standing still because of the Wendigo, the first time I played, there's a decision to save Mike or run to the light, and I'm like, yeah. So it was like, okay, so, run to the light, everyone will be safe, and everyone dies. And I'm like, oh, what happened? And then, like, the credits immediately roll. And then, like, I was kind of pissed because it would just bring me back to, like, the start of chapter 10. So it wasn't that much, but it was enough. I was like, oh, it discouraged me from going back, which may have been some of the intention. Like, I don't know.
Right, they wanted every decision to matter, basically, which is why they completely disincluded any sort of saving or manual function. Theoretically, you can get around that, I suppose, if you, after every, or before every decision that's going to happen, you drop back to the PlayStation 4 UI and copy your save file to a thumb drive or to the cloud and then just restore it after you made that decision. But, they wanted every decision to stick so that it would be more...
Would you do that?
Would I do what?
Would you do that?
I don't know. Incrementally save it every time.
No, I wouldn't do that. So my question then is, like, if the player doesn't have the ability to go back to any of these significant decision points and make a different decision, like, if it's not there, if the butterfly effect, UI particle explosion is not there to signify that and make it easier for the player to do that, then what is it there for? Like, what purpose does it serve for the game to hammer me over the head saying, that was a significant decision that you just made? Like, why can't I just feel the significance of it based on what I did and based on the story and the repercussions I see play out?
Just came in and said, boom.
So what, you want the music to swell a certain way every time you do something?
No, I want different things to happen in the narrative based on my decisions. And for me to say, oh, I can kind of see the cause and effect of how what I did caused that to happen. Like the way a story works, right? Which is kind of a big part of this. But there's a tension there, right? There's a tension between, it's the same tension that, like, when you play Heavy Rain and you make a decision and then, like, there's a dramatic chapter break, and then during the dramatic chapter break, the, PlayStation trophy thing comes up, and you get a trophy for, like, the thing you just did, trying to, like, role play a character or just make a decision, in the context of the story. And that's a weird tension to me, and I usually don't like it, because there's dissonance there. It's like reminding me it's a game when I'm more focused on story element. Mm-hmm. And so I like for there to be some kind of reason, like that I can try to extrapolate as to why that makes sense to have in there, and I don't have any for this thing. I don't see any benefit to the boom butterfly effect UI.
Well, there are some games that makes binary positions, or basically any finite number decisions as a UI work in the game case. Telltale games commonly post up what your decisions were, but at the same time also post up what other people's decisions were by connecting online and letting you know what percent you felt into. And that is a genuinely interesting information. That gives me a good reason to look back to what I did.
Yeah, I mean, they have the so-and-so character will remember this thing, which is not that dissimilar. So.
Right, and even just saying status update during the butterfly effect, I would have been fine with, because at that point you're telling me something happened. That's fine, whatever. You tell that to me for every decision I make, so I'm kind of numb to that. But you're also hiding the significance of that decision. So when it comes later and you realize, oh, that's what the machete was for, like, that makes you feel smart or makes you feel dumb or whatever, depending on the situation. And, like, that to me would have been a far more organic video game experience than one that reminds you that it's a video game, which the butterfly effect does to me, or basically any quick time event does to me as well. The exception being any sort of shooting and aiming events, because the controls are consistent on that, and likewise any sort of keep your controller still event, because again the controls are consistent on that.
Why do we like save the date then?
Why do we like save the date? Well, so okay, that actually probably segs into, without going too deep into save the date, which is its own. I'd have to kind of explain some stuff about that. I do want to attempt to argue like the other side as well, of like, here are the things that I could see being good about it. Mm-hmm. And there might be some of the things I like about Save the Date. So Save the Date is I'll just summarize it as it's a very Super Smash Brothers brawl. It's a very fourth wall breaking narrative game, with lots of different branching options, but it's mostly based on kind of acknowledging that you are a player playing a game. So in the way, Ant, that you were saying, like, you like that Until Dawn is kind of like self-aware in its writing, like, I can see justifying it in that way, right? It's like constantly exposing the machinery of the game to you, and in a way that kind of fits with like a campy self-aware story. So I can see that argument. And like, when I think of it that way, it maybe makes me like it slightly more. Not a whole lot more, but
it's like you saw, like, I don't know, Friday the 13th, and why are you wasting my time or whatever? And at the movie for wasting your time.
I just would like, I guess, the game to have the confidence either in itself or in me that I'll be able to like attach significance to things without it telling me that it's significant. Like that does bother me in anything, no matter how good it is. Like, this is an important thing. It's like, well, how about I'll decide that? Like, I'm like, theoretically,
you bring up like interesting point, because like one thing playing through the game that I was kind of like at odds with was, on one hand you have like this whole, it's a slasher movie, and it goes through like the normal like slasher movie beats, which that's fine, but then there's a whole aspect with the like analyst, which I was like a little
Dr. Hill.
Yeah. That was interesting. I liked that in some parts.
Dr. Hill was kind of weird to me, but go on.
Like, as soon as he came out, I was like, oh, so it's kind of like, again, I don't know, it was kind of weird, but, it's kind of like one of those things where, if the game was fully about, like, the butterfly effect, and, like, if, there were aspects, like, if it was more narratively, integrated, I think, if decisions you made, like, they talked about like what we did, stuff like that, like what the characters talk about, like what they did, and integrate that into the story. I think that would have made it work like a little bit better, but as it was, it's like, it's just you're basically moving these characters, about. Like, towards the end of the game, I didn't have a problem with it, but like I kind of started thinking of the characters as like extra lives. Because I was like, oh, so if, Chris dies, I still have like, 5 other people I can control. It's sort of like that is, I kind of just want to see how the story will play out. And I got, up until like the end where, I screwed up. I got, I think everyone except Matt out because I couldn't figure out like what I was supposed to do there.
You got Matt to survive. Congratulations.
No, I didn't.
Everyone but Matt.
Everyone but Matt.
Oh.
Because there's like the part where you have to like save his girlfriend and it's like jump to safety and it's like, oh, so she's gonna die if I like jump to safety. It didn't make sense to me.
We lost Matt with that.
Yeah.
Matt is considered to be the hardest character to save.
Yeah, I looked it up.
Second
it's like,
to Jen.
You need he needs to like either jump off then or he needs to have like the flare gun.
He needs to have the flare gun and jump off.
Yeah, I never found the flare gun.
Right. Those are actually one of the more decision making points that I like. It's counterintuitive to think that you should try to save Emily kind of thing. So to explain this segment a little more thoroughly in detail, there's a part where the watchtower falls down and Emily is hanging on threads while Matt is in a much more safer ground. You have a choice of jumping off or saving Emily. If you try to save Emily a couple of times, they'll just kind of prolong it until finally Matt gets caught by the Wendigo and gets hooked by it, whereas Emily will survive just fine even though she was hanging on threads. Anyways, that was one of those counterintuitive decision moments that I actually liked because it felt less gamey in that sense. It was preying on your expectation as a gamer to think that a positive route always leads to a positive conclusion. And I personally like where the game was a lot more ambiguous. And especially also, like, sometimes not making a decision is the right decision moments were also, to me, one of the stronger moments in the game. Because
I like that aspect.
Yeah, I like that aspect as well. But those are those moments where the decisions came to me far more organically, and they preyed on my gamer sensibility, which is, I know this is a decision, but not taking a decision is a possible narrative-driven choice as well. And I like that multi-dimensional aspect of the game when I see it, at the very least. And like also the totem, where it gives you a little premonition of what's going to happen next. Like, I was a big fan of that as well, because now you have more information about future decisions you're making, and again, adding far more dimensions to your decision making. Anytime the game basically tries to complicate the binary decisions that you often get was, I think, the highlight of the game. I like those parts. And, it to me, as a player, having some sort of impression from the game, it made what looks like either a right choice or a left fork choice a lot harder to do, because I have a lot more information in my mind. Ambiguous enough that I don't know what the results is, but clear enough that I know there's a difference between the two. Or the third path, which is not the game choice, that it effectively makes the game more complicated and difficult for me.
I feel like it's a really tricky tightrope to walk for this type of game, between like a sort of branching narrative that has no surprises. Like, the cause and effect is so kind of blatant and obvious in the way that it plays out that there's kind of no surprise. And then on the other end of the spectrum, like a game that is incoherent in that, like, you don't feel any sense of control because the cause and effect that, the narrative designer has like wired in there is just, everything's like a swerve and a twist where, it's like, I couldn't have predicted that, so I'll just randomly choose and it'll be the same. And, there were parts of the game that I felt walked that tightrope fairly well. And then there were other parts where, not to belabor like the butterfly effect thing, but just, again, like, I would expect if I'm given that knowledge, like, that to me is a way of making it more coherent. Like, it's saying, okay, this is clearly something I've done it has a cause and effect relationship with a future thing in the story. But then there were moments, like we've already brought up a couple, where you can very easily say, like, make a snap decision towards the end that completely obliterates some characters in a way that, like, you know, maybe fits, but just feels sort of arbitrary, I suppose, and it can be frustrating. Like, we missed... Okay, so there's a big plot twist involving these two twins that have fallen off the cliff or whatever, and then one eats the other one and becomes a Wendigo, because that's how you become a Wendigo. It's through cannibalism. And this twist was really heavily telegraphed, in my opinion. Like, it was an obvious twist. And we had all talked about it already. Like, for those who hadn't figured it out on their own, which I think all of us had, like, we all were just kind of discussing it before the game revealed it, or the characters kind of figured it out. But while we were kind of traveling through one of the later sections of the game, we missed some kind of diary or something that, like, enlightens one of the characters to this turn of events. And that then has, like, an effect on the subsequent thing. And to me, it's just, like, that's not a very satisfying branching narrative at that point, where it's just like you miss a very kind of obscure thing that you don't even know is there. Like, that's not necessarily a choice anymore, unless you saw, like, a premonition about it and chose to ignore it. I mean, it's the choice, I guess, to not thoroughly explore the environment, but it's mostly just like, oops, you missed the little breadcrumb thing, and now this character is dead. So that's, like, a very unsatisfying kind of cause and effect in a branching narrative to me. And it's like incoherent to me that would be the reason that particular thing would happen. So it's a really tricky thing to get right. So I was impressed by the parts that I felt like the game got right, but there were a lot of misses.
Yeah, it's like a really fine line between when you are playing as the character and you're making a decision that the character would make and what you as the player would make. Right. So it's kind of like, are you, the chess piece or the, chess player sort of thing.
And if we're meant to be very kind of approaching this narrative as, it's this very self-aware thing, and so we're constantly aware that it's like a goofy game or whatever, then for that to be effective, I would expect that the game is kind of acknowledging more of what I'm likely to know as a player. Like, it's kind of dealing with me in a more direct way rather than asking me to take this fictional world seriously as its own, like, self-enclosed thing. And that, to me, like, in the comparison with Save the Date, like, that's what Save the Date does. Like, the entire narrative is dealing with you as a player, and it is being very fourth wall breaking, but it's then using the fact that it's acknowledging what you're doing as a player to then, like, make you think about all the stuff that you're doing. So it's very self-aware, but it, like, uses that self-awareness in a much more consistent way.
The game evolves with you.
Right.
The other kind of games that kind of reminds me of the game evolving with you aspect of things is, like, Undertale is a good example of that. I like to think at least Chrono Trigger does its best trying to do that as well.
If we're talking about horror movies, Cabin in the Woods is, like, a really good example of that. Like, I don't want to spoil that because I don't know how many people here have seen it yet. But yeah, like, I would have liked, it's kind of weird because I would have really liked it if they had gone all out with the fourth wall breaking, probably gone the more Undertale direction, which I could see why they didn't, because they're trying to market it to horror fans, and I don't think people would want, like, a lot of, like, gamey stuff in their horror games. On the other hand, like, I would have been fine if it had just, like, not really addressed, like, if they downplayed the butterfly effect stuff. Because, like, I agree with you, in the beginning, they kind of mention it because that's, like, a major, aspect of the game and it keeps popping up. But, like, if they kind of just, said, well, this is, what's going to happen, like, there's branching paths in the game, I think you could have just left it at that, and, it doesn't really affect, like, the actual narrative in the story. Like, yeah, I think it's like it tried to balance the line between, are you as the player making these decisions, like, are you affecting these people, or are you playing as these people through them making, like, their decisions?
Yeah, and there's lots of other little elements, and again, they were putting me in two very different mental states, particularly early on in the game when all these systems were introduced. So, again, if I was trying to argue against myself from earlier with regard to the butterfly effect thing, it's like, even if you can't go back to those decision points, they do affect the characters' like stats, particularly their relationship values, which the game shows you like your, in numerical form, like your, relationship bar with other people, which is always an interesting choice. I've seen games do that that I like. Like, I feel like they're doing it for a reason. And clearly some of those things did affect parts of the story in this, but a lot of them, it felt like pretty light as far as how much they used that. So, I could see that, UI effect is an important prompt to then go check out, like, oh, this thing maybe changed my relationship with this character. But again, it was kind of obvious. It'd be like, as Mike, I completely abandoned, like, my girlfriend, and, like, I'm a goof and I don't help her get away from the monster. She's, she likes me a little bit less at that point. It's like, I kind of didn't need to go consult them here that much, but I found myself doing it still, partly because of that UI pop-up. So again, it's another one of those tension things of like, the game is not necessarily keeping me in the story because it keeps distracting me with all these like game system-y things that it wants me to check out. So there was that one, and there was one other one that I'm blanking on at the moment. What were some of the other systems that we haven't mentioned in the game besides, let's see, so there's butterfly effect.
We mentioned the totems.
I don't know, I'll come back to it.
Observations,
Yeah.
clues.
The clues are interesting.
The clues I like because it's
the
like
clues,
story that you could kind of piece together.
Yeah, I mean, they would also like inform each other, like, like Mike, when he's walking through like the sanatorium or, all the clues he finds, he relates back to like everyone else, so then everyone knows about it. So it didn't become, I like that because one thing that drives me crazy in like horror movies is one person finds out about something and it takes them so long to like relay information to people that could like actually save them. What you find, like they immediately relate to each other. Like the part where they escape or they're in the basement from the Wendigo and they find the guy's journal where they talk about like information the Wendigo. I like that because there was the option of you could immediately tell, the other people about it.
Yeah, that was a
is
weird
a lot more.
moment. Sorry, I was gonna segue that with the last decision there. It's Ashley that picks it up, and you have a choice of either not letting anyone know that being bitten by a Wendigo does absolutely nothing or not. It's like, why is that an option? Well,
and sorry, like that drove me a little bit crazy because I know like the actual Wendigo legend, and I feel crazy and I feel stupid because I didn't pick up on the Wendigo thing at all because they mentioned cannibalism a ton. They mentioned like Native American stuff a ton. It was in the wilderness, like it was so. And literally, I had that spoiled for me like a couple days after the game came out. Like in some conversation, someone said it's like, "Oh yeah, it's a Wendigo," and I literally forgot about it until like the guy mentions Wendigos, and I was like, "Wait, what?" It's like, "Oh, that makes total sense." But I knew that Wendigo bites don't turn you into Wendigo. It's literally just the cannibalism. So I'm like, "Oh, so why are they? It's not like zombies or something." So I was a little bit happy that, they find that out and you can actually tell them,
Right.
Yeah, that was an odd choice moment to me as well, because I just didn't perceive any reason or benefit to why would I be told that.
It's because the character just got done screaming about shooting her and killing her. This character just had an embarrassing moment where, and maybe if she chooses not to tell her to save face.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's really cool, actually. I like that.
In my playthrough,
I'm not seeing the logic behind that.
Well, it really lowers.
So in other words, Emily is less likely to hate you if you hide that information.
Well,
if you're trying to get that particular character, Ashley, I guess, to survive, then maybe you want to have her play it safe because the other characters might react poorly when she now says stuff.
In like the end section, like when everyone's running out of the basement from the Wendigo and like the final bit, the girl that everyone was accused, the girl's bitten, Emily shoves Ashley, and that's like a thing where it says, put her at risk because, she was behind everyone else a little bit. But if you didn't mention that, then, I don't know what happens. But like that's what came up for me. It's like, oh, that makes sense. She doesn't like you as much. she'll throw you under the bus.
Well, in our playthrough, when we reached the end and it came down to everybody trying to get out of the house, well, our game ended with only Sam and Emily surviving.
Joe did not like that. There's a long story behind that, but anyways.
But we also encountered this part where Emily had pushed Ashley out of the way, trying to get out of the basement. And because of her pushing her out of the way, once Sam and Mike had figured out the shooting the gas, or opening the gas and breaking the glass would let them escape, Emily was the first one out the door because she pushed Ashley away. Had that entire sequence in the basement not gone down that way, she wouldn't have pushed her. Ashley would have been able to actually escape before Emily did. And in this event, it would have been Emily and Sam who died rather than Ashley, or Emily and Mike who died rather than Ashley and Mike.
Mm.
Certainly those moments, like that I was playing as Mike, I think was the choice of actually shooting Emily based on obviously people who were goading him into it. Like there weren't a lot of choices in that sequence that I felt like were very agonizing choices necessarily. Just like, okay, I'm not going to shoot this person based on like, somebody wants me to and there's no information. Like that was just silly. So those were actually a couple areas where I did like, because one of the things that I was kind of expecting about this game as an interactive version of like a slasher horror movie is that you would have the opportunity to, reverse the traditional experience you get as a person watching one of these things, which is just yelling at the characters for all the stupid decisions that they make, right? Not that I do that, but that's like the stereotypical thing. It's like, no, don't go into, the haunted chainsaw factory or whatever. And the game, I didn't feel like really offered you much opportunity. Like a lot of the stupid choices the characters made were in the linear narrative that you couldn't control. So it didn't really like deliver that at a lot of places. And that was one area where it's like, okay, cool. I cannot just shoot this person for no reason. So that's good. Like it's an easy choice, but at least it gives me some satisfaction from being able to control these buttons. But those were like kind of few and far between.
It kind of had like the reverse effect on me of like, in most horror movies, like, oh, don't do stupid decisions, I'll get you killed. I was like, well, I could do a bunch of stupid decisions to get all these people killed. There's one part where I think it's like the part where they find out Josh is the mystery man or whatever. There's like the part, the Jigsaw ripoff. There's a part where like it's Chris and Ashley with like the chainsaw.
Yes.
So in that part, it's like you make a decision between
Ashley
them.
and Josh are tied up, and Chris has to make a decision.
Yeah.
There were two.
There's like the second decision where it's like you die or Ashley dies,
Right.
and I did nothing because this was like I think really late at night, and my logic was if I do nothing, then the game will be over sooner because there will be two less people to control. And then, of course, like nothing happens, which is like, oh, disappointing a little bit.
It's funny you have that experience because I actually made the same decision, but the reason I did that was because Tolan told me so.
You pointed the gun at Ashley first, though.
I think that default it.
Yeah, you have to do like it's really confusing because it shows you pointing at her, then she freaks out, and then you have the decision to move between them.
So it's one instance where the character's actually dumber for being controlled by you. So I can't figure out how to like hold it on in the right direction.
I did like that, like as
So
soon as
that happens without you pushing anything at all.
Yeah, I don't remember that happening in my original playthrough myself. She never freaked out because I pointed the gun at her and I was pointing at her.
So that was Chris, right? Chris and Ashley.
Yeah.
Rushing to that part. So speaking of Chris pointing guns at people like a dummy, that is actually the other bit that I was thinking of that took me out of things at the beginning was it's not necessarily a game mechanic, but the way that when they introduce all the characters, they do like a weird close-up thing of all of them and they give you 3 adjectives to describe their personality rather than just letting that come through in the story and the dialogue. And Chris, as I recall, one of his adjectives was protective. And then one of the very first things you're doing as Chris is you find a gun sitting around while you're waiting for a ski lift, and he just points it at like Sam. I think like his buddy's just like waving a gun around, just idly pointing it at her. And like this guy is protective. Like it's just anyway. So that was another thing that bothered me is like if the game took out some of those elements.
Yeah. Weird part for me with that is, it's obviously a tutorial for like how to shoot a gun. And, I didn't miss any of them because, it's pretty easy to do that. And then like the part where the old guy is like, I've seen you with a gun, you're like not that good. I'm like, it's like shooting like, these, in the actual world, like I'm shooting these really hard to see targets in the dark. It's like, what kind of comment is that? Also,
was that the Wendigo expert guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
He never said that in our playthrough.
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. I kind
No,
of
that was funny too because like Samantha would constantly comment on the fact that I wasn't shooting anything, and I'm like, that's kind of on purpose on my end, and the game kept insisting that I shoot things. So yeah,
horrible question, but did you guys shoot the squirrel?
No, we didn't.
Yeah, I looked up what happens if you do, and apparently a crow comes down and like claws Sam. Like I don't see the connection between there. Like maybe he gets scared and just attacks her for some reason.
So the game explains that hurting animals is bad luck.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, but that was like a weird thing where they did the butterfly effect. There's like 3 or 4 of them in like the first 10 minutes. I'm like, oh, how short is this going to be?
Well, ironically, that decision, Taro was playing as Chris, and Taro chose not to shoot the squirrel, which meant the crow didn't scratch Sam, who Anthony was playing. When Anthony later was trying to escape from the killer, he was able to successfully hide from her because Taro did not shoot the squirrel. When she managed to get through the wine cellar and she's running, she trips on something and she falls down and she kind of hurts her head. But then Anthony chose to have her hide and she was able to successfully do that. But had she been scratched by the squirrel, it would have left a wound. She would have opened that wound when she fell and blood would fall while she was trying to hide and fill up water, tie her up with water somewhere.
Yeah.
So it was all because of one player's choice that the other player was actually able to succeed.
Boom, butterfly.
You chose a water Pokemon.
There were a couple of choices too that I don't think what I was choosing is what ended up happening. Like the scene where where you go to either save her or save yourself. It doesn't present it as like, oh, I'm going to save myself and run off. It's when I saw another playthrough of it, he jumped to a ledge where it was safe, and he was closer to her to rescue her. So it doesn't. And it said jump to a better position so that you can help her. I think everyone would have said, oh, play that one instead.
Yeah, sometimes the wording is a little either ambiguous or misleading, but I kind of catered that specific part to me towards a better. To me, I like that decision a little better than not making it like jump to a ledge kind of thing. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's where like the kind of tightrope back that I was talking about before comes in. It's like if you're presenting a decision, I guess like let's just say you're wanting to present it realistically. Not that that's inherently better, but like you don't always know all the ramifications of the decision, obviously, before you make it. But I think it's often useful to at least have some idea of what the intention is, like whether or not you can predict the outcome. And that's an area where, like, again, it's just not clear. Like, what am I trying to accomplish by choosing one or the other, even like as this character? And sometimes with the snap decisions, like, that information isn't there. And sometimes that's better for like a quick in the moment, like tense thing, but then it's kind of unsatisfying when you look back.
Even going back to the scene where in the beginning where Matt comes up with binoculars and you're offered the choice to show him that his girlfriend with his ex or her ex or not show her. I think we all wanted to show her. And I think she was like snotty about it, like, hey, look at your girlfriend. As opposed to just like, oh, I'm really sorry.
Right.
So
yeah, it's so rare that games, even when they give you like branching story options, really let you kind of control like your reasoning behind it in any way, or somehow like communicate that to the game. So it's a tough thing to do, right? But the games that I've played that do that, I love. Like there's a text adventure game called The Baron, which deals with a lot of heavy subject matter, so I don't often recommend it to people because it can be a tough game to play through. But that is one thing that it does that's great. It's like it not only has you make branching choices, but it then like follows up with you. Like every choice that you make, it then like questions you further, like why did you do that? And so then you explain it to the game, and it kind of like notes that and incorporates it, which I can't really think of any other games that really do it to that extent. But it's like more satisfying somehow. Like even when that information isn't used that much, it's like, it's when you make a decision for a particular reason, and then the character rotely does the thing you told them to do, but with a completely different tone, or like it seems like, their thought process doesn't match up with yours, it like takes me out of it.
I think Silent Hill tries to do to an element that where it tries to predict your personality and, adjust the game accordingly. That's the only other one that comes to my mind that attempts to predict your reasoning.
Yeah. The part I was going to say was like the only part that I felt where the game was like misinterpreting my intentions behind choices was with the analyst, with the doctor, because like, he would ask you things and he's like, oh, so you're really going to say that? And like, I think there's something where he was asking a question that was worded weirdly, like maybe it was about honesty, like I don't remember, it was like about honesty maybe, and I answered something wrong, and he was like, accusing me of like, going, not actually being that honest. It's like I have no idea like what the question was actually asking me.
I think it was, what do you favor more, honesty or loyalty?
Yeah.
And then it was whether you chose versus charity.
Yeah. So I kind of, I like that, like overall, as in, it's kind of trying to push towards, it's trying to understand like your motives behind stuff, but then it's also asking you questions and kind of accusing you of not really knowing what you want, which I don't know if that was like for everyone or it's just me, because like I think of weird reasons behind my actions. In the actual game itself, I didn't feel there were a lot of places where, it was ambiguous, or like you make a decision and the character makes a decision that you would think it would do. They would do. Like, I think the only part was, with Matt, and it's like, jump this, and in my mind it's like to save yourself, but, it actually would save him, and, she would be fine.
What are your thoughts on Dr. Hill? Because I'm not entirely sure where I stand with him, to be honest.
I thought that his sequences were incredibly goofy. I like the sort of psychological profile aspect of it. I just like that inherently, even though I never really saw even without seeing it mapping to anything in the story directly. Like I can't map those choices onto anything that happened, like in terms of like plot developments, and I'm fine with that. Like,
Right.
I still, maybe it's like the egocentric, nature that I have or something, but like I just like that. I like being able to like express. It was kind of goofy doing it as a group, but it's kind of like a cool group personality profile. So I like that. Just in terms of the character itself and like the performance, obviously that's like, the biggest name actor in it. And I usually like Peter Stormare. And I usually like him a lot. I didn't like him in this. Even with the game being like very cheesy, I mean, this felt like the most obviously he's playing to the rafters with his performance. Like the character is written and his performance, amps it up to be like as over the top as possible. And,
Was that because you thought it was a commentary on the game itself? Because there's a big reveal where it turns out it wasn't.
Yeah, so that was the thing that I really liked about it, which was I really thought it was going in one direction, which was because everything is about kind of you as the player and you're playing it all in first person, and it's not clear, if you're controlling a character, it's not clear which character it is for up to a certain point. And he starts making a lot of very typical kind of, I guess, what I think of as game story cliche comments about trying to sort of make you as the player feel guilty for like your participation in what's happening. And that is just like, that's very overdone thing to me. So I thought, like, if that's the only reason, at that point it wasn't clear if there was any other reason why that was happening. I felt like if it's just going to be more of this, then I really dislike this section. Then when it's revealed that it's actually, in a way, it's kind of character development for the character you're playing as. What is
Josh.
Josh, yes. I liked it more for that being the purpose of it. And that we sort of, like, I think it's always a weird thing, like we were talking about, you know, our decision making and whether the game kind of treats it as, I guess, okay, the extent to which the game allows you to, like, map your personality and your choices onto, like, a character that also has, like, a written and pre-decided personality. Like, that's another weird form of tension, right? And so I liked that the character development of Josh, a lot of it was just those things that we decided. You know, like he had some of his own personality in the game, but it was kind of like this attempt to join like player created characterization with like the written characterization. So I thought that was a cool attempt, and I liked it a lot better than just the game wagging its finger at me for playing it, which I'm bored with.
I realized, like, he and Samantha are the two characters that I thought had the least amount of screen time, and thus I had the least amount of connection to. I still I still argue that Samantha was, in my opinion, the character with the least personality, but in Josh, you can because of that segment, you can kind of infer what his personality is like, and I do admit that I like those segments, as part of that. But at the same time, like the whole, you know, fourth wall breaking conversation, that it starts off with literally, like, that bitterness is still lingering in me. So I have this weird relationship with Dr. Hill where I'm not even quite certain whether I like his dialogue or not. So I'm just kind of torn on on any sort of segments of those, because, like, I like, it's one of the few moments, I think, where the game does a good job of actually making decision making in the sense that whatever consequence occurs is incredibly ambiguous until the very end, right? But other than, and like, it kind of leaves you guessing, all right, I had these questions, how is this affecting the gameplay? And you're kind of hardcore aware of this fact. But other than that, like, I don't know. I'm just, there's parts where I like about him and this whole segment with Dr. Hill, and then there's parts I don't like about him, in particular the fourth wall breaking parts, and whether he's there as an insult to the player or not. And I'm just left with an incredibly mixed feeling about those segments. Sorry, Anthony, but were you going to say something?
It's been like 10 minutes since I was about to say something.
Hopefully you didn't lose any time.
No, I've lost it.
Okay.
I think I just said good.
You like the over the top?
I like the over the top Dr. Hill. He's fine.
I like the
I
character.
I don't think most people go into this game with a game dev's brain thinking about what does this have to do with me or whatever. What does this have to do?
Is that a game that's great?
Yeah.
What does that have to do with me?
Yeah.
Well, to Anthony's credit, the way I played the game was like observing how they animated the character, and I would
Nobody's
just circle
gonna-
around and walk back and
Right.
forth for 10 minutes, and everybody's like, "Go on with your game."
You can't be crazy.
Animations and Dr. Hill. I will say, I feel like this was one case that benefited from the Uncanny Valley a bit, because clearly he's meant to be a sort of increasingly unsettling character, and, you know, I don't think they were necessarily going for Uncanny Valley. I think that's just where we're at as far as like facial animation stuff. They were clearly going for like Kevin Spacey in Call of Duty or whatever. Just make it look as much like the actor as possible and try to make it look real. But yeah, that was the fact that he was just a little bit off. The animation like helped matched up with the performance.
Something that kept taking me out of it was any time you had to like do a, you know, any sort of like mini game or what have you, where you had to like use the controller to like move your arm to like open the door, to like, you know, do something with your hands. That felt like so robotic to me, because it's like, you know, you hold down the trigger, the hand moves, and you freeze, and then you have to move the trigger to light a lantern or something like that. I didn't like that. There's not really a good way around it, but that's something I kept.
The heavy rain interface. So.
Yeah.
What
was
was
there? Sorry.
It was another thing that added some tension to the game, I think.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with the controls. I had a problem with the actual human animations because they'd reach for something, but then they would stop right where the next part of the animation would be to continue. I liked that. I thought that was fun. I didn't have that much of a problem with PTEs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think if they added that to the quick time events, it might have added a little more to it. Like you're being chased down the hallway, and so just pressing hard to go left or right kind of actually hit you with something.
I think there was I think someone had to open a door or something, and someone else is coming and they go, "What are you doing?" Because somebody didn't open the door or something.
I don't remember this part.
Yeah, I remember.
Well, I think the part of opening the door was when Jessica and Mike made it to the cabin, and she trips, and he has the choice of either going and helping her up or picking up the keys, and Mike just kind of stood there until she got up and said, "What the hell's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
I remember that
Yeah,
now.
that's right. Yes, my hand was frozen up clicking.
I swear there was a time where you had to open a gate or something. You're being chased.
Yep. That was in Mike's sequence.
Yeah.
Yes, I lost a lot of credibility with what was Mike's girlfriend, Jessica?
Yeah.
I forget because I accidentally got her killed.
That was
I was trying to get Mike killed, but I should have known I was going to get Jessica killed.
Yeah, there were parts in Mike's segment when he was in the sanitarium, and in Sam's segment when she was trying to kill her, where they had to either move the window closed of the door or somehow open it in between the quick time events before they were able to catch up. I think Emily had one as well. When Joe was playing as her, he had to run out of the door, close it behind him, and then lock it. And just when he thought he was safe, that's when the Wendigo bashed through and hit him in the neck because he got his guard down.
So that wasn't actually an avoidable situation.
She didn't have to get bitten.
I see. Interesting. See, these moments I like when we're discussing about this because it's oh, that was a possible choice, That's yet another example where I think the game was stronger at. I thought that was something that was pre-scripted and you had to go through it, so.
Yeah, that whole situation in the basement could have been completely avoided.
Can we talk about the Wendigo stuff? When I was playing it, one thing that, and you mentioned this, Taro mentioned this a while ago, about how there's a supernatural element and there's a slasher element. Mm-hmm. And up until that point, and this is going back to when I was saying I completely missed all the Wendigo clues. But up to that point, I was thinking the story was just a slasher thing, because when they have the whole Josh, was behind most of the reveal, he shows how the ghost is all him, all that stuff. So they kind of just explained away the only supernatural element, which was, the ghost part. Mm-hmm. And that was the part where I was oh, so there actually is supernatural elements in there, but, they explained that away, and then the Wendigo comes out left field, and it's oh, so this, that could have been an actual viable option. Do you think it would have benefited if they had, more set up to the Wendigo, or, how much did you guys pick up on the Wendigo?
Before the Wendigo reveal, I thought there was more than one person involved with all the stuff that was going on.
Yeah.
I definitely picked up. I thought there was 30 guys up there, because there was so many people all over the place, doing this. They the timing didn't match up. So it's oh, so there's 4 or 5 guys on this mountain.
There's the flamethrower to the stranger. I don't think we ever got his name.
Yeah.
I don't think they ever revealed it. That's just the name of the guy up closer.
Team Fortress 2 Pyro, basically.
It's the exposition.
At the beginning, you know, that's exactly what I thought was going on is, you know, it's just this crazy, like, arsonist. Because they have, like, at the very, very beginning where, you know, it's the two girls who die, like, they're running away from the Wendigo. They don't, you know, they don't really show that it's, like, a thing after them. You just see, like, the fire and you see, like, you know, the guy in the suit. So it's like, oh, so he's, you know, this is his arson vision or something like that. Like, he sees things moving, he has to burn them. And, you know, I didn't pick up that's like a creature thing. That it's just like a, you know, or maybe it's just like infrared or something like that.
I think once I saw the scene, I assumed monster right off the bat. Just assumed that it wasn't like infrared cameras or anything. I heard there was a crazy guy and there's monsters and you had to deal with both at some point.
Well, when you saw the flamethrower guy, most of the time at the beginning of the game, he was always wearing a goggles. So, for me, whenever I saw the infrared vision, I thought it was the flamethrower guy looking through his goggles.
Yeah.
I did not pick up on the Wendigo until the first time I saw it, and I said, that thing's not real, chasing after her. And that's when, for me, you know, the game, when you look back on horror films, throughout the ages, especially in the 80s, you had pretty much two different types. You had your slasher with Friday the 13th, and modern day you have Saw, and then you had your monster movies. And this one essentially managed to combine both of them. It started out as a slasher, and then just when you think that you're safe, it morphs completely into a monster movie. Kind of like From Dusk Till Dawn. You think it's a cop chase and some bad guy thinks it's a vampire movie halfway through.
Yeah.
I have to say, I enjoyed the shift when it switched over to being about the Wendigo. Not really because I have a preference between like monster movie versus slasher necessarily, but mostly because it marked the end of the forced, the particular type of forced jump scares that they were doing. I feel like up until that point, when there were not assumed to be any supernatural elements, but the game had to work in like 20,000 jump scares, it was all these characters like trying to frighten each other, popping out and going boo. And that made me hate every last one of them. Like, because they're going back to this place where this person's siblings were murdered last year, and they're gonna go try to have a fun time, and now the thing they're gonna do is try to like spook each other by like just try to flip each other out more. It's like, I don't want to believe in these characters, and if I believe what they're doing, I hate them, basically. So the Wendigo dispatched a lot of that, because now you can just have, you know, jump scares based on like monsters popping out instead of the characters doing dumb stuff to each other. And that was a good advantage.
If you think about it, though, the entire time before the monster came around, all the characters are constantly pranking and punking each other. And that's entirely what caused the problem a year ago, because
so they haven't learned a single thing, so they are jerks.
They all deserve to die.
They're unrepentant jerks, and I don't like them.
Well, that's kind of how they do it in horror movies. They make make you hate all the characters, so you're like, you know, oh yay, he's going to get murdered by Jason.
Right, but so then that's why I was playing it, trying to get my character murdered, which apparently bothered other people. It's like, if I don't have any investment in this character, why am I expected to try to make them live?
Yo, that part where Jessica dies and you have a flashback of you Michael falling into the water. That was like the greatest comedy moment.
Yeah, right.
Like, I recall that, and I'm like, that's the reason why Jessica died. You fell into the river.
That's a really good point. And that was like a really, and almost even more blatant example of the kind of thing we've been talking about, where like the game is simultaneously making the cause and effect relationship more obvious to you as the player.
Right.
And there are some advantages to that, but it can be like comical and terrible in some cases. Like, they literally, I played as Mike. I went through this quick time event where I was supposed to be chasing after my girlfriend who's getting dragged away into the woods. And I just didn't hit any buttons. So it was total slapstick, like smacking into tree branches and falling over, and it was hilarious. And then when my girlfriend died, they felt the need to then do a cutaway to just one of the parts of the QuickTime event that I messed up, out of like 20,000, which makes it feel even more arbitrary. It was like, it was the point where Mike slipped and fell in the river, that was the reason why Mike's girlfriend died, not any of the other, pratfalls or anything. And it was just the goofiest thing. There's no way to take it seriously.
Well, what's the start of all this trouble?
It's true. It's all downhill from there.
Sort of tangential. There's like a Heavy Rain video this guy made where you're supposed. It's basically like this thing where you're supposed to grab a guy. I haven't played Heavy Rain, so I have no idea what's going on. But you're supposed to grab a guy in like one, QTE event. What this guy did is he didn't do anything, and he let the whole thing play out. And it's this like hilarious Looney Tunes sequence where the guy is like, he's running down, like they're on the street, he's running down the street, and then he crosses the street, and the guy keeps getting hit by like every car that's going by, and he runs into a supermarket, and the guy like jumps on, these like counters, and he starts throwing like tomatoes and stuff, and the guy trips over a chicken, like, there's chickens running around, it's like amazing, and he catches it, like, the end result either way is you catch this guy, but it's interesting. And I mean, this is a game where you really don't want, like, Until Dawn is like, you really don't want to see what happens if you fail everything, because then, everyone dies. Yeah. It's actually weird because, like, with the Mike sequence, if Jessica survives, is entirely based on, like, how fast it is you get there. So, like, you can still fail, like, a lot of quick time events, but it's just like, if you get there, then she kind of looks dead, and I don't think he ever finds out if she lives or not, like, until the very end.
I believe she does. He doesn't, yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, her end of the story is kind of, like, separate from everyone else's. Because, like, in my playthrough, I was like, oh, she kind of looks dead, or she will be dead very soon.
You mean he doesn't find out until the end of that quick time event?
No, like, the whole game.
That seemed pretty blatant to me.
Yeah.
She falls. Yeah, she didn't look like she was going to be getting up and dancing around.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, like, what he's saying is, even if you manage to get through all those, she'll still be lying down. It's just that her jaw will still be intact.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So she'll be, like, and that was the point where it's like, oh, so she's dead anyway. So, like, because then she falls down, and then, you don't see her until, like, basically the last, like, 10 minutes of the game, and there's, like, this little sequence.
Right, and Matt will be like, how the heck are you still alive? And that's, like, exactly your reaction. You're like, how the heck are you still alive? At the very least, we had a good time when that happened. I'm gonna return back to the whole switch from slasher to horror. Ironically, like, I actually think the part where you had to decide between Josh or Ashley was one of the stronger moments in the game, because you have to make a very real decision, or the lack of decision, on who lives or who dies. And I actually kind of like this portion of the game a little better, as the person that was making the decisions themselves. Of course, if you were just watching me do it, it was more like, it felt really stupid, and that definitely was my feeling when I was watching a demonstration. But actually being the person that made the decision there, I kind of like those portions a little more. My entire innards sank the moment the Wendigo was revealed, and I quote Joe because this was exactly my reaction, and was throughout the entire game my reaction after the Wendigo revealed, which is, why is Emily being chased by Golem? And I'm like, from there, all magic in that game was lost to me, and I just had a hard time relating to the game from there. I do admit that the characters were a lot more likable once the reveal came in, because there's a huge tone shift where, a good chunk of characters die at that point if you played it our way, and so it makes it
The right way.
So like, there was a lot less pairing, and as a consequence, like, especially Mike's segments, he would be the lone guy trying to go through some really dangerous situations. And, there was a lot less banter there. There was a lot less places to crack jokes and whatnot. So I admit I liked the shift in tone, but I was not a fan of the monster being revealed at all. I would have liked it if the monster was not revealed at all, and it was just a question, it was left as a mystery for another day.
Well, once the Wendigo showed up, that's when all hell broke loose. I mean, the tension got kicked up and all the characters could die.
Yeah.
The first time you saw
Mm-hmm.
the Wendigo was with Emily when she's in the mine,
Mm-hmm.
and she's running away from. I mean, she could have died during that chase. She didn't have to get back to the cabin. And then from that point on, Chris had to face them, in which case you did die during that. You had to be really quick with Mike in the sanatorium because they were swiping at you every step you took trying to walk down the path.
Mm-hmm.
There was a couple more instances, basically. I mean,
Perhaps as a gameplay element, it's more dangerous at that point. From a narrative standpoint of view, I kind of liked it better when I was more in the dark than who the killer was. And I personally prefer my horrors to be ambiguous enough that it feels like you leave with the horror still in your mind. Because if there's a Wendigo reveal, then you walk out of the movie theater, or you walk out of
Walk out the movie theater looking around, looking over my shoulder for the Wendigo.
like that doesn't happen to me. The moment it's like, oh, it happens to be a vampire, I'm like, okay, that's it. I can just head out of the movie theater and take a deep breath and say, that will never happen to me again, kind of thing.
So
And I don't particularly
If it was a pack of rabid dogs or something?
Huh?
Would it be scary if it was like a pack of rabid dogs or something? Or
Yeah, I would think so, because I'll now be scared of my own life. Like I said, I like it when horror leaves with you. I don't like it when I know that the horror is fictional.
well, like Anthony was saying earlier, when he was playing as Sam and he had to face the Wendigos, he had to stay so incredibly still.
Yeah.
Right,
And
those were one of the stronger moments.
There was a lot of tension there. I mean, he flipped the switch, and you didn't get to see him as he tried to save the rest of the game. But I mean, there were sequences where the Wendigo comes like literally right up to your face.
That's what I thought would happen.
Yeah, and the tension is really bad there. I mean, I even took the point that Joe was mentioning at one point where I put the controller down on the table so that I wouldn't move it.
Yeah.
And even without holding that controller, I felt the tension of having the Wendigo's face right up against the screen.
But my reaction was, and I quote, is that Golem chasing Emily? So, I mean, I do know the segment you're talking about, and I had to go through YouTube to make sure what happens if everyone survives, what's the sequence for that. And my reaction is, oh, hi, Golem. You're making a smiley face at me. That's good. That's my reaction to it. I just thought it was absolutely goofy. And, I just couldn't. I find it hard to find it scary. It just looked goofy to me.
There's a really hazy distinction that I don't know if I'd be able to describe correctly, but when you're talking about two types of horror movies from the 80s, right? I do watch some horror movies, and the ones that I like tend to be usually described as psychological horror or body horror things, and I don't really know what the connective thread is between them, except that I know that those are the ones that I like after I watch them. But it's not exactly like what you were describing, because they're often things that I'm not afraid are going to happen to me, but oftentimes they're connected somehow to a real thing, a feeling associated with a real thing that could happen. The fly, as an example. I'm not worried I'm going to get my DNA spliced with a fly, but the things that happen in that movie are kind of a weird kaleidoscope, exaggeration of fears around mortality and terminal illness and stuff, and things that I really do fear. So I think I can kind of relate to some of the stuff that you're saying as far as I don't need it to be a plausible thing that can happen to me in real life to be frightening, but once it is explained at great length in the movie, once the movie takes any of the mystery out of it, I feel like the slasher portion had a mystery to it, right? We were trying to figure out who's doing it or whatever. Right. That's not necessarily a mystery that's going to linger with me for a long time. Mm-hmm. But still, the reveal of the Wendigo coincided with Stranger showing up and being the most expository character under the sun, where he just explains everything that's happening in one long info dump. And that did, I mean, the only thing that was left then for me as far as the horror element of the game was the kind of the momentary like jump scare or like a tense moment.
What about surviving?
I didn't really have that much investment in the survival.
Well, I mean, he was Mike, remember?
Yeah, you were trying to kill yourself.
And to be completely honest, I was Chris, and I didn't particularly like him either. So, as much as I felt, Chris's death was tragic, at the same time, I only thought it was tragic.
Right.
I didn't think it was scary.
So I think, like,
I'd be scared the whole time. There's other feelings.
I thought it was tragic.
What I'm trying to say is, like, I'm not trying to discount those moments where, like, when you're describing feeling tense at the moment you had to hold the controller still, like, I did think those were tense moments.
Yeah.
I thought those were effective moments. But those don't linger with me in the way that, like, a psychological horror thing with, like, some element of mystery where I don't feel like I've quite figured everything out.
So you, like,
or had it all explained, like, sticks with me after I'm out of the moment where the thing is right in my face, like, screeching at me or whatever. Like,
so if you like heard growling under your bed, looked under your bed, and then there it is. There's the Wendigo. You're just like, oh, it's just a Wendigo.
Well, I mean, in that specific example you provided, Wendigo exists.
Yeah.
We're living in a world where Wendigo doesn't exist.
You know.
I don't know if I looked under my bed and saw a Wendigo, I'd be very frightened. But I'm not frightened. I'm not frightened anticipating that happening because I don't expect that.
Wow.
So I kind of relate to it.
You had that snake in.
I did have that snake in my room that time. Yeah, that was frightening.
Yeah, that was good. That's good luck in Japanese culture, so I would take that as a positive.
I'll be honest though, I love horror, movies, games, whatnot. It's been ages since I've seen a horror movie or game that really scared me, whether it just be, psychological horror or regular horror. I can get scared by them. Jump scenes seem to work with me, but that's not a scare so much as a reflex.
Right.
I never really quaked in terror at anything. I found one sequence in Silent Hill unsettling when, I think it was Silent Hill 3, when Heather walks into the room and she's got a mirror in front of her, and then suddenly all this black stuff starts enveloping her in the reflection. But that's because I have a thing about reflections, and I often think of how scary it might be if something in the reflection is not doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Well, a lot of people are scared of that.
Yeah. But playing the game, I enjoyed it, not because I was expecting to be scared, but simply for what it was.
Yeah. And that's fair. I just feel one way when it comes to horror, and this made me feel the other way.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting this game to be like the exact type of horror that I like. And so it delivered I felt like it delivered on what probably most people expected from it, and then some. Because like you said, it was cool, and it managed to get elements of both, like slasher and
stuff that gets stuck with me is stuff like Uzumaki. It's body horror kind of thing. Same with like Garbage Pail Kids.
When I was coming into this game, I didn't really have that high expectations because I've seen tons of horror movies, and I like horror movies, so I was like, okay, so it's just going to be a goofy horror movie, and that's ended up what it being. It kind of is interesting because I had just finished Soma, but not going to go that much into it because it is a game worth playing. But that's a game where it's semi-realistic enough that that kind of sticks with you. With this, the only games that managed to scare me, that stuck with me like this, where it's just a bunch of jump scares, was like Oculus Rift games. Because I used the Oculus Rift horror stuff, and that's kind of really jolting because when something jumps out at you, when you've got yourself is enclosed in this thing, there's kind of not an escape from it. When at Amnesia at its scariest parts, you could just look away from the screen, or you could just you hit a bunch of buttons and then, it goes away. But like, with the Oculus Rift on, you can't really like do a whole lot. Didn't they just announce like a spin-off or like something for Until Dawn?
Yeah, earlier this week they actually announced an Until Dawn spin-off called Until Dawn Rush of Blood for the PlayStation VR.
Oh. It's interesting because that's basically like it looked like it was just a funhouse thing where you just literally on rails and
I think they did describe it as Unreal.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's cool. Like, if the opportunity ever comes up to try that out, I might.
I have to say my favorite thing about playing this was the fact that we played in a big group together. Like, I felt like that was the ideal way, at least for me, to experience this game.
Yeah.
So,
But Joe and I's commentary. But really, was that the reason why Jessica died? That you fell into the river?
yeah, I'm probably not going to jump at strapping myself in to play with VR.
The one other thing I wanted to talk about was the characters, both in the beginning and towards the end. What you guys thought about them?
We've done that.
To an extent.
Well, who was everybody's favorite and least favorite character?
The flamethrower guy was my favorite character. And my least favorite character was Jessica, Mike, Chris,
That's not the Wendigo. Was
Emily.
Least favorite.
No, I kind of like that. I kind of like the Wendigo. I kind of like the Wendigo, or Golem, as I will call it. It's actually easier for me to list out the characters that I felt neutral of or I liked, honestly speaking. This being Samantha, which I was completely neutral with, and Flamethrower Guy being the one I liked.
I think it was a lot easier to dislike people at the beginning because there wasn't that impending sense of doom. And then at the end, a lot of the dialogue drops away, and it's trying to get away. And at that point, it's hard to hate someone when they're trying to survive.
Right.
Yeah, they kind of do set you up a little bit to hate like a bunch of people, and they do. The analyst, I think, at one point does like call you out on it, saying, "Who do you hate the most right now?" The only character I felt sorry for was Mike, because in my playthrough I kept screwing up. I kind of felt that, like, in his mind, he's screwing up, but for reasons beyond his control. So it's like,
he actually comments on it.
He's not good under pressure.
Like
Looks like a tough facade.
my failings have brought such misfortune on him. He doesn't understand why.
So did your Mike lose his fingers?
He didn't, but I lost the machete, and I forgot what he needed it for.
It could have helped him later on when he's going to the sanatorium.
Yeah, that's right. We had the machete at that time.
But if you don't feel any kind of that's something you can use it.
Yeah, I think, I got through it fine. The one part I thought I really screwed up was when I blew up the sanatorium, which I think happens, either way.
Right.
Yes and no. When you reach the last door to leave, that's when two Wendigos show up. And you can either choose to shoot one of them or shoot barrels and blow it up. You can choose to shoot the barrels, and then that's it.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Or you can shoot one of the Wendigos, and then the other one will jump at you. And then you switch to Sam, and Sam makes her way to the sanatorium to find him fighting with the Wendigo. If you chose to blow it up, you don't have that sequence with Sam at all. Sam opens up a door and finds one that has made it since escaping from the sanatorium.
Yeah,
so she meets up with him.
That's what happened to me. I thought it was really weird that, there's no, the old guy constantly mentions how you shouldn't kill Wendigo because it releases their spirit, and, the only thing you can do is kill Wendigo. I thought that was a little weird, so maybe it was, a little bit of, a sequel hook.
There actually was a moment, because, I played through the sequence as Mike, and at this point, he'd become much more coordinated, so he was able to take on a bunch of Wendigo instead of walking into tree branches. But, I had some moments where I did actually hesitate to shoot them, even though, I was locked on, and I was like, maybe I can get out of this without, is this going to kill it and cause me more problems? And because the game had kind of reinforced, sometimes it's better to do nothing, and I had that bit of information in mind, I had, a slight hesitation, and that was the only thing that it did.
That whole sequence is a little weird. Like when you walk through the sanatorium and shooting them away from the bars. Like you can walk through the whole, like most of it, I think, without having to shoot any of them. But there's no reason like not to, because you kind of just like shoot the. Like I don't know. Like I guess you would save bullets, but then you don't really need to save bullets because you can get all the way to the end without losing.
Well, remember, the flamethrower guy revealed the fact that killing them sets the spirit loose to Chris while two of them are walking to get Josh. He never makes it out alive. And Chris may or may not, but once he does get back, they're in the basement, and they find out about that fact after Mike has already left to go to the sanatorium. They're flipping through the book, and they're like, oh, killing them will set the spirits loose. So that's why Sam decides, I'm going to go warn Mike that he shouldn't be killing these things.
Wait, that was the
What
reason
does
why
actually
Sam
just
was
setting them loose do if you have to eat somebody and be a cannibal to be infected by it? Like, do you only have so many cannibals that become Wendigos because there aren't enough spirits to kill all the cannibals?
You're just laying around in the pool.
There's no cannibals, so let's just pick the next person and call it a day.
Like the original, like the versions I've heard of, like, you know, the actual Wendigo myth is like, you know, it's just you eat flesh and then you turn into one. Like there isn't like a spirit that's like one. You know, there's a spirit, but it's like it's not trying to actively encourage people to eat flesh, which I think there's a point where the old man could reveal that. But yeah, like, you know, it doesn't. It's just like a curse for becoming a cannibal. It's not like a monster trying to turn people into cannibals. So I thought that was a little weird, and I mean, but they took liberties with it because there's like the whole thing of they can't, they can't see you if you aren't moving, like, you know, like the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. I thought that's like a little weirdly specific. But you know, I mean, it worked because that was a really neat mechanic.
Right.
The guy who wrote the game has a big thing for Wendigos, apparently. The guy who wrote it is the flamethrower guy. He put himself in there as the flamethrower guy. But he also came out with a movie called Wendigo a couple years prior, exploring this topic. So he definitely has
like a horror movie or a documentary.
Honestly, I'm not sure I ever really looked into it that far.
It's good that he's that kind of fixated on one thing because I think it gave the story a through line. I think of this as the best game by David Cage that wasn't made by David Cage basically ever. Like it's the best Quantic Dream game because like it borrows a lot from what they do, but it doesn't fall into the problem that David Cage constantly does of having his stories completely fall apart because he just crams in every idea that he thinks is cool as the game goes on. Whereas this person's like, I like Wendigos. So now you're going to run away from Wendigos. Like, alright, I can at least follow that.
I definitely think the story was solid, and now that I think of it, I just remembered exactly one other thing I liked when it came to characters, which was I actually liked, despite the fact that I hated Jessica and Mike, I actually liked the relationship a lot. It was the only relationship in the game I thought felt natural. And probably people disagree with me on that regard, seeing that they're both, you know, completely unlikable characters. But to me, like, it felt like that relationship was, one, something that two completely unlikable characters would do, and two, it felt to me healthy enough that, you know, it made all the other relationships, such as Ashley and Chris's, which was stupid, and relationship between Emily and Matt, which was outrageously abusive, look that much better.
That was stupid about Ashley and Chris.
They were never honest with each other until the very end.
I think that's a lot of reason why Josh put them in the traps. I mean, if you remember,
Right.
Ash,
Now, that is a problem on its own. Yeah, I agree.
Chris wasn't involved in what happened to Hannah in the beginning of the game.
Mm-hmm.
He and Josh were passed out, probably from drinking too much. So he had no reason to put Chris through any of that as far as payback for Hannah. But he did make the comment to Sam before they went into the basement about how it almost felt like Chris and Ashley needed some sort of tragic event to bond over, which was somewhat foreshadowing of the fact that he's putting the two of them through all these Saw-like predicaments in order
Jigsaw the matchmaker.
in order to make them finally eventually express their feelings for each other.
First off, that part to me was hilarious. I absolutely thought that was hilarious, and at the same time took a little bit of me away from the game.
Which part was hilarious?
The part where, Chris goes, "Hey, look, Ashley, I just want to let you know, they're both strapped on chairs, and Ashley is screaming at the top of her lungs that they're gonna die. And this is before they find out that the saw blade is falling down on them, so that part is still not yet revealed. But then Chris suddenly goes, "Hey, Ashley, I just want to let you know I love you." And I'm like, what really? This is the best time for you to do this confession? So
You thought they were about to die.
the thing is, Chris didn't show himself to think that he was about to die until the saw blade started falling, and then he finally acted that way. But I just thought
Except
that
the whole point where you're being potentially chased by a knife-wielding murderer that has you tied up,
But I just thought that part was absolutely hilarious because, I don't know, that was one of those moments where I'm like, really, game? Really? Is that the moment you decide that this is a good time for them to confess the relationship? So, as I said, I thought that was hilarious. And to me, it being a hilarious moment works better than it being a serious moment. If you guys read it as a serious
I don't
moment...
think it was meant to be hilarious. There were saw blades lowering onto them while they were
that happened after that.
He also had a gun, didn't he? He pointed a gun at her in our playthrough.
No, but even that segment, the whole Jigsaw segment where it's like you have to make an important decision right here. Even about whether to shoot Ashley or Chris.
It wasn't hilarious.
I don't think that part was hilarious, by the way. The small short segment before that where they're just they're strapped into the chairs. Ashley is screaming at her top of her lungs that she's gonna die even though she can't see anything that's going around her. And Chris saying, "I love you." I just thought there was this huge disconnect from the situation and Chris saying, "I love you."
He thought he was gonna die. He thought that was gonna be the last time they saw each other when they were alive. While being alive.
Then that just makes it more hilarious. That's why now?
No, it doesn't.
It simultaneously took me out of the game, and that shock of taking me out of the game is what made me laugh at it.
He didn't want to die without letting her know how he felt.
Right.
Maximum, yeah.
Yeah, that was the wrong time to do that.
He is kind of as useless as
Yeah,
Mike in a crisis. Mike can't open a gate. Chris isn't doing anything to try to help the situation.
Right. He has a lot of regrets.
So, anyways, I just didn't think their relationship was healthy regardless, because they just wouldn't reveal themselves.
So bad? They had the best relationship in the thing.
Him and Josh could make closer if we didn't miss our high five.
Yeah.
That was the best. That was the other best moment.
Yeah. Quick time event for a high five. Or the buddy
Chris
bump.
and Ashley, right?
It was Josh and
Chris.
Samantha.
Who was Chris with?
Ashley.
Josh.
They were good friends, right?
Yeah.
They were good friends,
Yes.
and they really liked each other. That's a pretty good relationship.
Yes, but they didn't tell each other they loved each
All
other.
right.
That's why I say it's not healthy. They're not being honest with each other.
Tara wanted to help them.
Had Chris not died, they would have gotten a lot closer throughout the rest of the game.
I would believe that. I recognize that was my fault. But I don't know, that segment was so hilariously bad to me.
But yeah, I did actually like the relationship between Jessica and Mike. Was one of the fewest moments that I liked. When it came to the characters, I actually liked.
I despise their relationship.
Yeah,
I hate both of them and I hate them together. And all that they did was like have forced witty banter back and forth that I didn't believe a word of. It's like a writer trying to write like clever back and forth jokes. It did kind of work to me in the sense of like, if these are two dum-dums that are really trying to have like intelligent witty banter and top each other, but they just can't quite do it. But I felt more like it was the writer who couldn't do it. And we were meant to think these were really hilarious.
I think they all had their special moments, like Matt and clearing off the table, clear off the table.
Yeah, the game was full of that in the beginning, but they were the worst offenders, I think, or the most consistent offenders.
Our relationship can also change based on a lot of the actions that happen.
Yeah.
For example, in the version that we played, Mike missed all of his quick time events.
So what does that affect? It all culminates in a scene of how many clothes Jessica's going to take off, which I think is idiotic to begin with. And that's the only effect of it, because either way, if I had missed all those quick time events or not, we've already mentioned, like, Jessica's gone for the rest of the game. So what does it affect? Nothing. Like, it's pointless. It affects how many clothes Jessica wears in the sexy.
Well, it was also how they treat each other. Like when they walked into the cabin, because of
one scene in the
missing
cabin.
all the things, she's like, "How could you have stopped? How could you have froze up like that?" And all that stuff. And then she becomes very insecure, and she's like, I know I act a certain way, but I'm really actually a lot smarter than I portray myself. I can do it this way. And she's lacking a lot of the confidence because he's not a very confident person. But had it played a little bit differently, the reason why she ends up getting a little bit more unclothed is because she has more respect for him and more confidence in him.
If he didn't point a gun in her face,
it makes no character.
I had
who did the gun?
Mike and Jessica.
Right, in the cabin, he finds that gun, and you pointed it at her face.
Okay, I don't remember that part, but I do remember that the meter was already gone by then because I had hit me buttons during the previous one.
There's a part I hated in that scene where, I don't know, it's a couple parts I didn't like about the whole cabin scene, but one part is when the glass breaks, when the Wendigo throws her cell phone through the window, which I don't know why it would do that. I found the gun. He doesn't take the gun. Like, the first thing I did was try to go over to the gun, because there's like a gun on the mantle, right? Mm-hmm. And, it's like, okay, so there's something to defend myself with. That's why he has the gun there. But then he doesn't take it with him. He just goes into this, they just got chased by something. And he goes into the other room and he's like, okay, I'm just going to go with like my shirt off and that'll protect me somehow. And then he comes back and then she gets attacked. I don't know. That whole scene was like a little funky.
It's just, to me, it's one of the most egregious examples of like the waste of these elements that they put in. Like they put them in, they call your attention to them, they don't do anything with them. And like the kind of relationship tracking stuff, right? Where I said like, I didn't see a lot of places where that affected anything. Maybe there were lots of subtle ones that I just didn't know were there, and that's great. But like that is the one part where I know for sure, like it affects, the extent to which they, are physically intimate with each other. So, like, and then right after that, it's like their relationship is done for the rest of the game. So, like, that is the only point where it factors in. And to me, like, it has a lot of elements of, like, rewarding the player for, like, maximizing your relationship meter. So, like, you fill up the meter and then you get to see, the female character take off more clothes, which I think is just garbage. Like, I think it's stupid, lazy, pandering garbage. Basically. And if that's the only reason that gameplay mechanic is in there, because I can't think of another one, like that is the biggest one. It's like, I wish
there were
none of that stuff.
At the very beginning, when Matt encounters Ashley at the looking glass, and she has the option of letting him look through and see Emily with Mike or not. She can choose not to let him see it, and then he will be completely oblivious to that part of things. But in this instance, in this playthrough, we had him observe and he saw what was going on, and then later on, when they're in the fallen watchtower, or radio tower, he's trying to help her out, and she's screaming at him. He has the option of saying, "I know about you and Mike, I saw you two." Well, we didn't end up choosing that option, but he could have brought that up based on what was seen. And there were earlier instances in the game where he could have just called her out on how much of a pain she was being and just told her, "Settle down, you're overreacting." And she would have actually warmed up to him because he was showing a little bit more dominance than just being a pushover. So at the end, instead of being, acting like, he wasn't really that important, she became very concerned about him. Like, where's Matt? I need him. He's, part of my life, that type of thing. So their relationship changed a lot based on just the different ways that you were able to interact with each other.
That's good. I'm glad that there are other examples where it gets used. It doesn't make me like it in this instance anymore, because I think it's the way that it's used is too tied in with like a payoff, like what feels like a payoff is pandering to like a particular player demographic.
I happen to be that demographic, so I liked it.
My interpretation, you mentioned earlier that seemed like a failure of the writer between the banter between Mike and Jessica. My short reply to that was, it was dumb enough, and the characters were dumb enough that I thought like that seemed relatively on par with what they would say. It came genuine enough to me, considering their intelligence level was pretty bad from the start.
Doesn't mean that it's like enjoyable or good character development to have to sit through like long sequences of them trying and failing to banter.
Well,
like regardless of the intention, that's just
at the very least, it worked for one person, right? One person being me, of course.
Work in what sense? Like, depends on your definition of work.
Like, I liked that.
Okay. Sure.
I liked that part.
And if you liked it, you did like it.
The banner stuff is like, it's kind of middling because like, from a horror movie perspective, it's like, well, they're kind of all like that, where they just all have like this, clunky, stupid dialogue. And, for a game, I think it's more important to try and like make it more believable because you're, at the very least, like, you're going to be spending a lot more time with these characters than, in a movie, like, in a 2 hour, hour and a half movie, you're probably going to have like 10 minutes of, just stupid, like, banter, but then in the game, it's like, the whole sequence is like
an interminable.
Yeah, the whole sequence where, the period where they're banning, it's like an hour, or I don't remember how long. But definitely
felt like hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the game is very tropey, right? Especially I don't know if it's especially, but it had a lot more tropes that bothered me in the slasher portion in the early half. And it really people refer to the game as being self-aware, and I feel like a lot of times that is used as a justification for including these tropes because people can fall back and like, oh, I'm including it as like a commentary, like an acknowledgement of all these times it's used, but like we're not really buying into that trope or whatever. But there was a lot of bad characterization, especially for the female characters, who I thought were, all the characters were poorly written, but like there's a sort of cat fight sequence.
Oh yeah,
I don't really know how else to describe it, but between Emily, who is it, Emily and Jessica?
Yeah.
That was exceptionally bad. Oh, I want to go to the bath.
Yeah, and you're in control of, I believe, Matt, you're in control of one of the male characters, just looking on watching. You don't have control of either of the female characters to try to defuse the situation. Yeah, basically as Matt, you have choices of like goading them on or saying like, whoa, ladies, let's break it up. Like, it's all garbage. Everything about it just frustrated me. And, it really set a tone for the writing that, I was mostly just glad when the characters turned into like scream machines and just like running around doing fight or flight stuff instead of trying to convey any sense of personality, as I felt the writing consistently fell down.
Yeah, that's the stuff that I don't like about horror movies too, of this kind. Why do they feel like they need to pay homage to those things when they could be doing something totally different?
I think the reason why they use that strategy is to actually make them look like disposable people, although again, that puts into question why you want to do that in a horror game.
Why do they need to be disposable if you're controlling them and making you want to survive?
Well, then you have this hilarious sequence where, you're Mike and you're trying to change Jessica and you don't push a single button.
I guess so.
Right, and I feel like that's not what the designers are intending you to do.
Right.
So, in order for you to not want to do that, like I was saying before, like they have to somehow make you invest in the characters and care about them, or at least want them to survive for some reason, even if it's just to like get the good ending or whatever. Yeah, but the game did not create that sense of investment in me. I probably started from, a place of not wanting to feel that investment, but regardless.
Are there any horror movies out there that doesn't have some characters that you aren't going to like? I mean, if you're watching a horror movie, you know that there is going to be some characters that are going to die.
Yeah.
You're obviously going to want the most annoying ones to be the ones who get killed off. I mean, you're watching the horror movie expecting that somebody's going to, so those characters are put in there for that purpose.
I think that's why I don't like horror movies, because they're just cynical. They're just really cynical.
That's cynical and boring. Like, in equal measure. Like, I like a character that I'm, like, if not rooting for, then at least interested in on some level. And then when they're put in peril, or at least put in an interesting situation, like, then there's some stakes. For me. But if it's just a character that I hate, then...
Right. I like Jackie Chan movies.
Very important thing to tell.
I would argue with horror movies that there's some that make it believable. Like Nightmare on Elm Street, I think makes banter more believable because Freddy his character is like he's just banters. He just does like goofy things. So okay, that's like Power Glove and whichever one it was. I mean, Evil Dead, I guess, does that too. Like, I think it's like the thing where, if it establishes that like the personality of like maybe, their antagonist or the protagonist is like, super goofy, like it's not taking itself seriously. Like, I think then then it becomes a little bit more fun. I think when, you have like a Jason movie or, slasher movie where all the banter is like super serious, serious in a way that you're supposed to be taking it, as real human dialogue. Like, I think that's where it, all falls apart. And this kind of, teetered the line a little bit. Like, there's the analyst who's, he talks a bit about that, does a little bit fourth wall stuff, and, but then the characters still do it anyway. They still do it in a way they're expecting you to take it seriously. So I think that kind of, I don't know, it was mixed for me.
It was to the game's advantage that any sort of fourth wall breaking still managed to stay within a universe. I felt like that was actually one of the better portions of its writing.
Yeah.
The only exception to that obviously is the beginning about the butterfly effect. I thought that was really badly shoehorned in. And that was really badly, self-aware, but outside of that, it managed to keep a lot of things in the universe, and I appreciate its writing for that. I just suddenly remembered, there was a reason I had this thought in mind, but I might as well let it out. Probably it's now out of context, but I'm reminded of the comedy Shaun of the Dead, where, there's a segment that if you go to TV tropes, I won't say who, but one particular character dies, and according to TV tropes, their play testing crowd cheered at that part, and said they actually liked that this specific character died. I actually really like that character, so that part really turned out to be incredibly tragic for me.
So, I don't know. I tend to have some weird analysis of characters, and sometimes, like, when a specific character like dies, I might be much more happier than what the developers intended to be, or on the on the inverse of things, much more sad and awfully sad that said character died. Despite of that, as much as a lot of the characters that died in our game playthrough was arguably tragic in a sense, I never really felt sad about it. I had the sense of feeling that they were rather disposable. Did anyone else feel that way,
No.
or is it just me?
No.
Not feeling sad that characters died.
Yeah.
I didn't feel particularly sad when the characters died.
I mean,
Yeah, I
yeah,
wasn't out to kill them either.
Yeah, I was disappointed.
Yeah, disappointment was probably the best emotion.
I didn't want any of the characters to die. I didn't feel like they deserved to die.
I mean, the main thing about it is like when a character dies, it's like because of your decisions. It's not like, they stumbled into something that, they couldn't get their way out of. There's like a way to save them. I mean, this kind of also goes back to what I said before, is I started viewing each character as like, an extra life where, if one guy dies, and I still got like another character that continues the story.
That's weird, isn't it? It doesn't feel like the game was designed to be that way, yet you felt that. That's kind of weird to me. I guess, I don't know, is that due to writing reasons, or is that due to the binary decision reasons and thinking that, hey, we really don't feel like going back and trying to play this game kind of thing and just accept it?
I mean, we've just been talking about how a lot of characters feel disposable, like whether or not you actively want them to die. Like, despite my slapstick shenanigans with Mike, like I really actively want him to die, but I just didn't care. But like that, I feel like is a natural outcome of that. Like if you don't have a lot of investment, you don't care, the characters feel disposable, then like what prevents you from feeling like that I'll just stockpile like 6 lives at that point? Like a lot of them are just like interchangeable humans.
I felt sad when some of the characters died. The way I figure it is each of the characters is a different archetype. And when you look at it, there are a lot of people who pick these archetypes.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And some people are going to relate to some people more than others. I mean, I could say that I relate to Ashley or I relate to Mike. I liked generally most of the characters. I didn't like Emily. I hated Emily. But if you look online, a good portion of people don't like Emily. But there's also a portion of people who say that Emily was their favorite character. It's just, each character is going to relate to somebody really differently to each person.
I think playing it in a group, cracking jokes and stuff has an effect on how you perceive the game, perceive the characters too.
Yeah, definitely.
That's fair.
Playing it alone and in the dark is going to have a totally different effect on you.
Keep in mind, though, that when we were playing it as a group, we were each controlling a different character, and we were each making decisions for that character.
Yeah.
So in a way, we were molding that character the way that we wanted it to be.
Yeah.
If you're playing just yourself, then every character is a reflection of your own choices.
It does also have some, you weren't just doing that character has relationships with other people, so depending on how they're playing it can change how you're doing it.
Yeah, when I say that playing it in a group, like I feel like that was the ideal way to play it, at least for me. That's mostly because normally I would prefer to play, honestly, most games alone.
Oh yeah, same here.
But particularly if it's a game where it has a story that I feel like I'm meant to take seriously. But I don't think that this story was like that, and I don't think I would have been having that much more serious investment in it if I'd been playing alone. That was where I appreciated having a bunch of other people cracking jokes about around me, because I knew it wasn't just me. It's like, I was annoyed by some of the things, and that helped me get past some of my annoyances, move on to appreciating the parts that I did like.
I'm glad I made the gameplay just that little bit better for you.
I still did not exactly appreciate the part where you're just walking around the boundaries at the beginning doing animation tests, but I can't complain based on the way I played Mike. At least Mike, whether or not we hit any buttons, he progressed through that sequence one way or the other. Slowly.
Well, speaking of the animations, I mean, how did everybody feel about the presentation of the game? You know, not so much the story, but the animations, the character and voice acting, the emotions, the graphics. I mean,
I really liked it. I mean, besides like the part I mentioned with like, you know, the clunky quick time event stuff, but you know, the characters look good, you know, the environments look really good. I like the Wendigo like design. You know, how they like kind of move spirally and, you know, they kind of, you know, move really, really fast. I like that a lot. I mean, yeah, like overall, you know, it's good production value. I mean, I think that's, you know, kind of looking through like the whole game when, you know, when I finished it, like I was looking at like all the decisions you could make, and there's not that many like branching story elements, and I could kind of see like why they wouldn't want to be, you know, like have radically different endings, because I cannot imagine like how much time goes into like, you know, each scene. Because like this was a motion capture, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's gotta be, you know, horrendous. I can't even imagine like the QA on this. Like that's gotta be horrible.
before I played this, I would say the closest thing as far as really realistic motion capture was LA Noire, where the faces were just so incredibly realistic. I mean, they were showing them to Asperger's patients to see if they can read the characters correctly. Except the problem with LA Noire was that they could only put enough production into their faces, the neck up. So their body was completely stiff, and the head was moving around like it was realistic. But in this game, I mean, everything was realistic. The entire body, every facial feature was motion captured. I mean, all of the actors looked like their actual voice actors, and I thought that was incredibly amazing.
I don't remember getting too much experience of sort of Uncanny Valley with the exception of Dr. Hill, which is interesting thinking back on it, because it almost does make me think like maybe that was more of an intentional thing somehow, or maybe it was just that, you know, Peter Stormare was hamming it up, so he was doing a lot more kind of facial distortion at one given point.
I've actually got it a couple of times. Whenever there'd be one of those events where it wasn't actually a quick time, you just had to choose and you let them sit there for a bit, and then they'd like,
He's looking all around.
I have a screenshot.
The menus, when you like you pause the game or whatever, you could like move and look. That was the only time it got Uncanny Valley to me, because they like, you know, you can move their eyeballs around and then their head kind of follows. Mm-hmm. But that's like, it's weird because, you know, their eyeballs are moving like, you know, video game characters, and then their head kind of moves and they kind of like, you know, smack it. You know, I don't know like what they told them to do, like, you know, with their idle animations and what. It's like kind of weird.
I found that completely on accident. I had the game paused, and I guess I must have accidentally tapped the right stick, and suddenly his face just turns and looks at me, and that creeped me out for a moment until I realized that I could control his head or make it look wherever I was doing. So I actually had a little bit of fun when we were playing as a group doing that. When we were waiting on the screen, I would occasionally turn his head to look at whoever was looking at the screen to see if they picked up.
Can you go full Exorcist and just do like 360?
You can spin the head around so that you can have look like that.
Yeah. I noticed, because I am exactly that kind of very dickish player, anytime you had control in the game was basically when you can easily break the illusion of the characters looking realistic. Excellent example being, you know, if you're doing a binary choice and you keep you keep switching between the two, they start swiveling their head rapidly. And especially for me, that breaks me out of the game because they were just in the middle of a conversation. So right now you have this story going along where he's like, is this guy seriously just going to wait for you to make a decision? So that was one that immediately comes to my mind. But you can also use the right stick to move their arm around, and I personally like that. I played around with that, and like any part where Chris was just holding a lantern off to the side and then starts bumping to a wall, and he needs to contract his arm so that the lantern doesn't bump into a wall. Like that was really weird to me. The animation they compensated the controls for the animation. So like anytime I do a walk or a turn, it felt really clunky, and I was not a fan of that either. I'm much more a fan of a fighter control where even if it looks unrealistic, they just snap to the direction that you tap the left control stick to. That's what I'm much bigger fan of. But this whole conversation, I was going to say that for the most part, the characters look fine. I personally thought that the color coordination, their general use of, blue and orange was really excessive. And especially since especially the first part of the game starts off in college, and it's almost entirely blue or dark blue there. It just felt like, are they seriously just going to stick with this incredibly monochrome range of colors? And at least when they make it to the sanatorium, they start shifting a little bit of orange into it, and it's a little more interesting, visually interesting there. But to me, like, I thought there wasn't enough visual diversity to it that I don't know, I felt really numb to the graphics. And lastly, the other thing that immediately came to my mind, is actually a compliment. I like that the game used a lot of fixed camera angles. Those were some of the better highlights for me, because there are some, for the most part, it's not like, it seems like it's kind of there, but there are a couple of moments where they put that in there with incredibly clever ideas. Like there's a specific angle where you're staring at a chip on the stairs and you're controlling Samantha, and it looks like she might fall down from the stairs because, again, the stairs are chipped and you're not entirely sure if that's solid. But for that brief moment where you're walking up the stairs, there's a certain feeling of tension, even though nothing really happens. But like they make you hyper aware of these tiny details going on inside the scene that makes you think, like, is a quick time event going to happen here? Do I need to react at this portion? That they do a really clever job at. And I was personally a big fan of those parts of the game. I really like those fixed camera portions.
I'm thinking now about when they're looking inside the dollhouse, and the camera really helps. That spookiness of seeing all the dolls that were set up, like they were at the beginning of the game, and the ones head cocks over. I mean, that brought out the creepiness purely because of that camera angle.
Yeah, I completely agree to that. And especially, like, any time the camera seems to obscure some detail also is where I thought it was really effective. And there are some really clever moments where it does that, and, it makes you hype again, especially any sort of cave segments where they start doing that, where you know that there's a Wendigo in there, and starts making you hyper aware of, could the Wendigo be hiding off camera, right? So, and I was a really big fan of that decision making. So, it's really high production value, and I really appreciate what they were doing. I'm just the kind of player to easily break that illusion very quickly and start analyzing it from a technical perspective. So to me, those parts were significantly less important because I just play like that.
I think it was really nice. The one thing that I didn't like visually was the lighting. You fall into a mine shaft and you can run around and see everything.
Yeah, Joe was complaining of that for a long time.
A lot of these places, you wouldn't be able to see anything unless you had something.
In a lot of cases, the character either had a torch, a stick. They had a stick that they made into a torch with the rags, or they used their cell phone as a light. I thought that was pretty innovative. But like you're saying, though, I mean, that small light shouldn't be illuminating the entire game.
I'm glad it did.
Right now.
Not enough dark pitch black games,
Yeah.
walking around in the dark.
Well, I think that wraps up today's podcast. Any final words? I mean, did you like it or did you dislike it? Would you recommend it?
There are ideas in the game that I think are fantastic that really helps it. The totem that gives you a premonition of what's going to happen in the future in mind. I thought that was genuinely clever. Other parts, including like not making a decision, can be the right decision. As a whole, I think like there wasn't a whole lot of strong points to me that made it something where I would want to go back to it again. And in the end, I just kind of checked out YouTube and see what the other sort of endings are. I felt like, in that sense, the game was not entirely great. That said, I did enjoy the experience. I did enjoy playing it with everyone else, and I thought for the time that I was playing the game, I enjoyed it for what it was.
Personally, I think there's games that have done like branching storylines a lot better. I think there's games that have done like horror a lot better. I think I would probably recommend it as just like if you want like a group night to just play through your game. Like I definitely want to try it, with my group of friends who watch horror movies all the time, so we'll see how they react. Although I feel like not a lot of them are good at games, so everyone may end up dead at like hour 3 or something. But yeah, it's doing stuff that nothing else, it's doing stuff that's been done before, and I don't think that's like a knock against it, because I think going through it was, it's enjoyable enough, but I wouldn't like want to do it again, like unless it was in the group.
I certainly don't have any desire to ever play it again. I don't think that I would really recommend it to other people, especially to play like solo, just for the same reasons people have stated. Like, there are a lot of cool ideas in it, and there's some things here and there scattered that are executed really well, that people have already mentioned. I love the hold still segments, and any of the things that have to do with like inaction as a choice. I think is a great concept, and the game does a decent job incorporating that. I'd love to see a game. I'm basically like, I'm anticipating a future where people take some of these good ideas and put them in a more cohesive framework, I guess. So I hope people take from this example and make better games. I will say, I've kind of spoken disparagingly about kind of David Cage as a writer at a couple points here. And I remember the first time that I played Indigo Prophecy / Fahrenheit, which this game reminded me of probably more than any other game that I've played. And I really liked that game when I first played it. It's kind of my level of how much I hold it in esteem has faded over time, because I've hated pretty much everything else that David Cage has done since then. And even that game falls apart pretty significantly in like the last third. But mostly what I liked about it was the way that it presented its interactive story. And it's pretty linear, but it does a lot to fool you, particularly in the beginning, and just make you question, like things that really aren't major choices. It doesn't spell out for you if this is significant or not. And I feel like Until Dawn is probably the best version of that type of thing that I've played. It delivers on some of the promise of that in a game with higher production value and slightly better writing. So for those who have played some, Quantic Dream games like Heavy Rain and Indigo Prophecy, I probably would recommend it. It's worth a shot to see if you like this more. But overall, it's not really that much better than those games. So I can't really wholeheartedly recommend it.
Sure, why not? If you're looking for a little spook, give this a try. Play it with a friend. Play it with an enemy. Maybe you'll have a better relationship when you're done. My friend who likes horror games, she played it. She seemed to like it. So if you like horror games, I'm sure you've already thought about giving it a try. And if you ask me if you should, I would say yes.
Especially a real life Michael.
Yeah, I think it's a good game for anyone that likes horror games, or anyone that's just like a fan of cheesy 80s horror movies. There are points in this where the writing is just kind of just takes you away from it, but you put it in the concept that, or the perspective that it's an 80s cheesy horror movie, it falls in very good in it. So.
Well, I obviously loved it. I'm the host and I suggested it. I thought it was a great story. I thought that all the presentation, the graphics, everything worked well. I liked the butterfly effect system. I liked the idea that I was having a choice whether or not that was the illusion of choice or the actual choice in certain instances.
Boom, illusion of choice.
But yeah, I thought it was a great game. I would definitely recommend it if you're a fan of cinematic video games and particularly horror. Yeah.
Hello, I'm John, your host for the next Game Club meeting. We'll be playing a browser-based game called Frog Fractions. Frog Fractions is a 2D puzzle game, but mostly a parody of educational games and the line between game genres. I would strongly advise not looking up anything more about it, but it's free online and very short. See you then.